For the purpose of this story, and to keep animality, the name is R. I've been working with a local hiking trail as a volunteer to guide folks around a set of trails that are some of the prettier sides of the South and the state of Georgia where I've grown up most of my life. I'm not really a nature person, and being outside in Georgia in the South during the summer is killer. If you aren't prepared, heat stroke and bugs are notoriously awful during the summer. Almost every other billboard down here in the South either is a religious comment about not being condemned, don't do drugs, and not leaving your child in a hot car by themselves for long periods of time. In short, I wanted to get better with knowing some of the nature around me and maybe getting more social with a couple of folks. On weekdays I work over at FedEx plant about 30 minutes into town, and in the mornings on the weekend is when I go to help volunteer for the parks. This particular one is known as Wheatberry Shores. The place is into the swampy areas of the South where, in particular, where the wetlands of water can be some of the deepest and be populated by alligators. Some parts, like the main trails, are usually more forest, thank God, so you don't get nearly as swarmed with bugs so long as you have good bug spray. The park itself is in a super popular destination, with only 4 active trails folks can go down and only 3 actually allowed to be traversed by the public. Traveling down the paths, each of them have different difficulties as the place implies that mean different lengths and the pattern of the path. Each path is an offshoot of a main path everyone walks down to enter into the main trails. After talking with the folks at the main building of the park, you then leave out the back end of the building and the trail is wide and open, leading into the main bulk of the forest swamp that is the main attraction. When you go down, the first offshoot is on the left entitled Weasel Woods -2 miles. After Weasel Woods is on the right, named Hickory Pass 5 miles, followed by Lampley Falls 10 miles. Each path has a different thing towards the middle of each path. For Weasel Woods, there is a small animal exhibit where a few smaller creatures that are rescued by the park are kept and taken care of. I mainly volunteer there, helping with the twin flying chipmunks that have been kept by the park the last 3 years. Hickory Pass is where most adults going by themselves go, where the largest collection of oak trees in the area are and where a sort of camping spot is. There is a fire pit, a bathroom, as well as a couple amenities out there so folks can camp out in the wilderness but also not feel stranded. Then there's Lampley Falls. This particular trail is the longest available to the public and also has a camping spot. It's a long trek through some pretty rough terrain and where the park doesn't quite keep up with in making the path very clear. I should mention there aren't a lot of people keeping this place going, and most of the time it's me, 2 other folks, and the main director. Most folks don't travel down Lampley unless it was the summer, exactly when I'm volunteering. You'll notice I said there are 4 trails, but only discussed 3. That's where my little preamble here is setting up. Trail 4, unnamed, is just there. It's roped off. Nobody who works here goes down it. Nobody does anything with it. As you are traveling down the main road to get to the offshoots of the different trails, the path gets smaller and more upkept. Trail 4, unlike the other trails, just keeps going and isn't the offshoot. According to the director, they've had difficulties keeping the park up to snuff and being able to get to those back areas of the nature trails. They had a bunch of teens once go down the trail and get hurt, which led to them closing the trail until more staff could be hired to care for the trail. The trail itself was noted to be almost 20 miles, obviously not in a straight line, which led to a small off the bigger chunk of the mainland which then led towards the ocean. We've had a large number of seasoned hikers go down the trail and be fine, with some even saying it is their favorite trail and coming back every so often each season to see the changes. Personally, I've been down the trail twice. The first time was when my parents thought they could do it, and my mom learning really fast she was not cut out for being a trail hiker back then when I was really little. My dad was in the army, so for him it was nothing, and he carried me the rest of the way when my little 7-year-old feet gave way. The second time was last year when my mom tried the trail again, this time much more physically active and coasting it, while this time my dad fell behind. She still doesn't let him live it down. Family feeling aside, both times were actually rather nice. The trail usually seemed pretty, and yeah, it was a bit overgrown, but once you get the general path, and if you hike regularly, it's pretty straightforward. Saddened they closed the trail when I volunteered. I asked if they ever thought of opening it again. The director's response was odd, to say the least. Not worth it. Too many dangers, and it isn't well kept enough. If we can get someone to dedicate keeping the brush clear or cut the roots, then maybe, but as of now it isn't worth it. I know it's corny, maybe completely unworthy of the energy, but afterwards thought, well, if I'm already volunteering and it's something needing done, why not? And next weekend I took the offer in clearing the brush and getting the path clear. Look, I'm gonna be real with you, reader. I'm not athletic or weathered in any sense of the word. Just case I work a warehouse as my job means nothing. Yet, the idea that a family memory would forever be stripped from me was nagging at me. I've always been a sentimental kind of person, and having good memories with my family is important to me. With some garden shears, bags upon bags of mulch, and a Saturday with a podcast, I started making my path. I decided on giving the path a real name, something memorable and important. Freight's Fortitude. My mom is pagan, and in particular we are firm respecters of the earth and have various imagery of Frigg in my mom's kitchen. My mom found her peace in Frigg and within Wiccan culture after some really bad experiences with my dad's Mormon side of the family, of which my dad no longer worships either and is semi-pagan, or at least respects it. Either way, Frigg was a large thing for my mom, and considering she also beat this path and I consider my mom to be someone I've always looked up to for wisdom, I figured it was the perfect name. Fortitude came with the knowledge the path would take a while to carve and that the path wouldn't be easy. Going into it, I knew it would be difficult. Nevertheless, I was determined, guided with the idea that I was restoring something important to me and my family. The next weekends were long. My first weekend I carved the trail for at least 8 hours, from getting to the trail at 10 a.m. and not leaving until a little after 6 p.m. The body ached from the shoveling of the raw dirt, the scattering of the mulch, and the carving of the next shell of the trail as I slowly made my way through Freig's Fortitude. The first week left me sore as hell, and it sure showed when I went to work the next week. The next weekend I decided to cut it back a bit and only do 6 hours, and only on Saturdays. I figured by my tracking I was about halfway done with the trail, and where I finished last Saturday was marked with a little red flag, and that night I celebrated with a good, healthy cheeseburger from Wendy's. Another week rolls by, and as I'm hauling out my stuff to the part of the trail in my little 2019 Volkswagen Jetta Jacob, I'm stopped by another person who worked here, B, who asked what I was doing. B was the granddaughter of the director, basically living and working here from the second story of the main building of the park. I told her the whole sap story, and she I guess found it amusing, but warned me they had some pretty hard rain last night and to be careful. I drove about as far into the trail as I could and then dragged my stuff the rest of the way. Sure enough, the only thought in my mind was fuck. It was pretty washed at the halfway point, but I knew I had to start again soon so I could make up the progress. I diligently shoveled the ground to make the ground ripe and ready for mulch, planted the mulch, and made more little flight markers to guide the path through the woods. About 4 hours in, I was feeling the heat and needed to sit down. As I drank, I realized at some point my podcast stopped loading on my phone and was working to reset it. It was an episode of the podcast that was one of my favorites that always got a giggle from me, but for some reason the page wouldn't load. In fact, it seemed like my service just completely died. I am out in the middle of swampland, sure, but my coverage was always great out here and usually was better than in town. I did the whole tricks, lifting the phone and reloading the page, walking back a bit of the trail, all the things. It just seemed like nothing was giving service, not even emergency service. Giving it up, I resumed my pace and just continued working the path. I finally got to where I was last week, placing a blue flag this time as I had no more red-colored flags, and what that I was about ready to collapse. I carried my gear back to the car, drove out, and decided on something else to get me in good spirits like a Starbucks or something. Next Saturday comes, I get my things, travel to the site, and drive down the trail road yet again as far as I can before entering Trail 4. When I got to my blue flag checkpoint, it seemed like where I marked was off from where I remembered placing it. I kept note with a distance marker for progress, a GPS map on my phone, and the little flags. Yet, as I was double-checking my placements and map, not just one was incorrect, but they were all wrong. Each turn, each mark, each tree even was in completely incorrect spots according to what I tracked. The little red flags from before were still there, but they were completely veering off course and into different directions than before, yet still connected like a path. It's like someone came and deliberately moved my flags and then took my blue flag and left. Honestly, I'm just confused. I'm thinking that either it's a prank or that maybe I'm just going crazy from working too hard. Why though? It freaked me out when I saw it, but I didn't think much of it after just chalking it up to some delusion from the heat on my part. I decided to continue forward with trying to finish this path, albeit spending more on mulch than planned, but I am determined to get to the end and finish Fig's fortitude. This time, I swear it took so much more effort to get this path done, especially now that my distraction was gone and this time my surface just didn't work out the gate. I decided to focus on what I was trying to do, keep this path here. It's been a family memory that I want to preserve. I want future families to enjoy the path we enjoyed and maybe leave my mark here as the madman who decided to do all this shit unpaid for the hell of it. Sure, it was kinda dumb or in general a weird way to keep a memory, but it was the only distraction I had to keep myself working. It was at the end time as usual, 6 p.m., and I stick my now green flag into the ground that is at the halfway point. Tired as always, I make my way to the car and stick everything in. I felt exhaustion creep over me as I then moved towards the driver's side of my car. As the summer sun was beginning to wane on the horizon, I felt a breeze of cool air come from Frig's fortitude that suddenly traveled up my spine and jolted my eyes towards the path. I felt my eyes just look down the road, not really focusing on anything but feeling like I just could keep looking down the path forever. The cool summer air was nice on my sore body. You okay? Was then suddenly spoke from behind, from B. I jumped at the voice and clenched my chest a bit as my heart felt like it was choking my throat. Shitby, don't sneak up on me like that. I missed what you said. I asked. Oh, just saying bye. I wanted to see how the trail was going, but I can tell from the sight and smell you've had a good hard day, huh? She asked. I laughed it off, talking about how it was difficult as always. I then posited a question to B. Hey, did anybody go down Trail 4 yesterday besides me after I left at 6? The flags were all different and my blue flag was missing at the end of what I worked on. I asked. B shook her head. Just you, dude. That thing isn't worth walking if you were given money to do it. I looked down the path, the darkness of the night becoming closer as I watched. Cool. Can you tell me I watched to keep an eye? This is already exhausting as it is without having to keep getting set back every time. I spoke. There was a bit of a sharp tone in my voice by accident, mainly from being tired. I think B understood because she nodded and agreed. Tired, I made my way back home and enjoyed my Sunday off, satisfied with my work on Freak's Fortitude. The next week rolls around and what I find is either the most elaborate prank ever or is just straight up magic. The path of Freak's Fortitude changed over the week again. I don't mean moved a few inches or a new water stream cutting the path. The entirety of the direction, arcs of the path, everything was different. I'm here at the trail now and not really sure what to do. I know for a fact I documented the path correctly and everything should go in the main directions that they should follow according to my maps. I just sit there dumbfounded, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. At this point, I ask everybody around the park what's going on. I first turned to Bee and asked if maybe she knew anything about what was going on or if anybody had come up behind me or something to explain what was resetting my progress every week and moving my flags. She looked through a few select CCTV footage that was wired to the security office and nothing. Nobody came up behind me, nothing changed. I watched the footage with her and the security crew too. We saw me packing up the Jetta, driving away, and fast-forwarded the footage only to find nothing. Of course, there's no footage of the actual trail itself. All of the trails have no cameras on the trails themselves, just the entrances. However, clearly there's nobody else out here but me. It makes no sense. How in the hell does a landscape just change? Me and B decided to walk back to Freak's Fortitude, which I tell the name to be. We both looked down the trail, the winding path covered in weeds, reeds, slightly brushing up to the swamps, unsure of what to make of it as it leads out onto the little olive trees just out of view. I lean against the back of my car and just look over the path, my brain trying to think what the next best thing to do is. I'm combing my brain, thinking that maybe the swampland is the issue and because the majority of the land is surrounded by water that it could be enough. Be pointed out, however, that it wouldn't explain why the flags would still be upright and able to make a clear and concise path through the forest. Well, why don't you come back early next week? I'll come give a hand and we'll plot out a course of action. She explained. I laughed. Think you can handle throwing some dirt around a cursed forest? I asked, obviously not actually believing the path was cursed or the forest. She shrugged. Well, I'm at least out here being paid by my grandma, and on board. She explained, pointing back over to the main building of the wilderness park. With not a lot of ideas, and at least hopefully with finishing this damn path, I await the next week. This time around, we come much earlier in the day. Dee got in contact with a couple of other folks from the park, and this time I was going to get to the end of this road. We arrived before the sun even rose. Me, Bee, Tim, and Ryan. Tim and Ryan were friends of Bee's from outside of the park. She agreed to give them some under-the-table money in exchange for helping me with the road. After the director gifted me and my crew some mulch and more tools, of which she did simply to help us with our goal and seeing our desire to finish the path, we set to work. Tim and Ryan worked together to take the path while Bee and myself cut the mulch and guided the boys on the path to follow. This time, I pulled all the stops. I had no idea what was trying to stop us, if there was anything at all, but I was going to finish this road. As Tim and Ryan wore, I picked up a shovel and helped dig through the trail. I felt my palms ache as they grazed across the wood handle of the shovel, my feet sore from the uneven path of the swampy grass. My eyes fuzzed as the heat seemed to become stronger and stronger with each push of the shovel into the dirt and each step forwards into the swamp. Eventually, Tim and Ryan seemed to just give out. They looked exhausted, drinking water like they had never felt the softness of liquid grace their lips once in their lives. After halfway through, we seemed to hit this wall of exhaustion. Even Bee, who for most of the journey simply was cutting mulch, was sweating and panting as she shook from the heat chills. As we worked, bugs of many kinds then appeared. They swarmed our ears and assaulted our noses as they swarmed and buzzed. They must have thought us corpses, covering us like cysts and trying to taste our flesh as they ducked and weaved from our hands and arms to swat them away. By my document, we were 3/4s of the way through by 2 p.m. The path I carved at first was elegant and droopy, allowing me to see all the scenery. As we came close to the end, I forfeiting the goal and simply desired the end. I felt like my body was being tortured for the goal my soul had. My arms ached as I raised my shovel and gave the earth to prepare for the trail we pushed ourselves to create. As we neared the end, the trail soon ending after crossing into the island and appearing on the other side, I felt an exhaustion unlike anything I had ever felt before. Tim and Ryan had long since left an hour ago, throwing the towel on the goal. They stayed, mainly as someone to bounce humor off of. However, even she eventually found no strength to speak. As the afternoon came 4:30, we finally spoke as we closed onto the end. "I need water," she groaned, stumbling down Freak's fortitude and away from view. In my haze, I continued. Shaky, feeling ill and mentally drained, I pressed forward. As I came towards the end, a thick fog came around me as I, alone, continued to shovel the trail. My nose ran with snot, my eyes watering as a searing headache began in the frontal lobe of my brain and my mouth dry as a desert. Then, with a final, defiant push, I was through the fog and my shovel hit what I decided to call the end. Now on one knee, feeling the soggy dirt around me as I felt exhaustion finally take hold, my eyes glanced around the island forest and I could make out something in the distance. My eyes went wide as I thought I was hallucinating. As I looked out towards the ocean, 2 things were visible. The first, a stone pedestal that was about my waist high carved of a gray stone with a pillar-like shape jutting from the ground with vines twirling around the outer rim of the half pillar. The second, much larger thing before me, which stood in the middle of the foggy forest, was an archway of pure stone. Like poof gone. It makes no sense that I'm getting no sleep because I can't stop thinking about what it might mean. Either everything we know about the nature of reality is wrong or I'm losing my goddamn mind. But that's impossible, because I'm not the only witness. Both of my buddies saw it too, and both have been trying to forget they did. Me, though, I can't. It basically shattered my world and shook the very foundation I stand on to navigate this crazy thing called life. I was a staunch skeptic before this all happened, and now I'm not so sure. And that fucking terrifies me. It happened a few days ago while we were out hiking the backcountry near Ned. It happened slow, with a series of increasingly odd events that led up to us seeing her vanish. I'm still in a daze and I still haven't told anyone about this. I've barely even talked to my friends since it happened. I still don't fucking know what happened. We left late, when the sun was just beginning its descent towards the jagged layers of the Rockies. It was a play-it-by-ear kind of day. We had nothing else to do, and wanted to hike something other than the Flatirons in Chautauqua, something relatively close. So, Netherland it was. Now, I was born and bred in Colorado, and I've always felt strangely drawn to the mountains and the forests and the solitude. I loved it. And I was used to it, and that special kind of silence you can only really find in the mountains never scared me. But this drive-up was different. I was scared, terrified, really, and as I looked out of the passenger side window at the rocks and the trees it felt like there was something or somethings watching me back. I kept my mouth shut and ignored my gut. I thought I was being ridiculous. Besides, neither of my friends seemed scared. And yet, I swore that right before we parked at the empty trailhead, something was running through the trees next to the road, barely visible. It was ghostly pale and had strange elongated limbs, and it was fast. but I blinked and it was gone. I figured it was just a result of pareidolia or something and shrugged it off. The entire hike up there was great. The weather was great. The forest, great. And yet, there was still this feeling of dread dripping deep in my gut that I couldn't shake. It freaked me out, and I kept glancing around us, trying to hide my panic with laughter. I can't explain it, but I expected to see eyes, watching us, stalking us, and a few times I could have sworn I did, but when I looked back there was nothing there. We reached the top and it was magnificent. We were totally surrounded by trees and covered by sky. It was like we were standing inside a giant fractal, and I guess in a way we were. Fear forgotten, I took a deep breath, released it, and opened my eyes expecting to see the setting sun. Plop. I looked up, confused. The sky was bruised and roiling, about to burst. None of us had seen a thunderhead roll, and it must have blown in fast. It was almost like it appeared out of nowhere. We hesitated, not knowing how bad it'd be, but as thunder cracked overhead and a few more fat drops fell around us, we decided we'd better leave, and quickly. We didn't even make it 3 feet before the storm hit us. The rain was coming down heavy, sideways, blurring out vision, making the trail back slick and treacherous. We didn't want to chance it, and there's a saying in Colorado, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. So we hunkered down and attempted to wait it out. 30 minutes later, it was still going strong and we were just beginning to move to higher ground when suddenly, as quickly as it came, the rain was gone and the sun was shining bright and warm against our faces. It was higher up in the sky than I remembered, and I was in the act of pointing that fact out when there was a high-pitched screech and we all stopped dead in our tracks. What the shit was that? Is that smoke? Was that a car horn? Is that someone screaming? Holy fuck, look. At first, I didn't see it, but then I did. It was a car, completely totaled, smashed between the trees. The entire front end was crushed against a pine which was halfway uprooted. The window of the door behind the driver was totally gone, like someone had broken it. And the driver's side door was wide open, hanging by one hinge. No smoke was coming up from the busted part of the engine, but the back left wheel was still slowly rotating. We walked towards it in total disbelief, and soon saw that there was no one in the car or in the surrounding area. One of my buddies stooped down for a second and held up a small, shiny card, a driver's license. Address says she lives in Golden. How the hell did her car get all the way up here? For a moment, I thought he was asking why someone from Golden would come up to Netherland, and was just about to reply, when I realized that he was actually asking how her car got all the way out here. In the middle of the woods. The lack of roads wasn't even the problem, it was the space. Her car simply could not have made it through the trees, and, from the way it was positioned between them, it looked like someone had picked it up and placed it there. I closed my mouth and I said nothing, drawn towards the open door. I couldn't help myself. I'm a curious person. I walked right up to it and peered inside. It looked like someone left in a hurry, cutting out the seatbelt with a jagged knife, and leaving all their belongings behind. On the passenger seat was a Joseph Campbell book. I picked it up and something fluttered out of the pages. A picture used as a bookmark. It was of a little girl and a big white horse with a gentle face. I flipped it over and read the writing on the back. Sweet horse. Look. I dropped the book and picture back inside the car and turned around. My friend was pointing towards something out in the trees behind the car. There was a splash of bright colors against the neutral tone of the forest, and I saw the girl leaning against the trunk of the tree. She was so close I could see blood running down her head, into her face and eyes. Hey! Hey! Are you okay? But she either didn't hear my friend or was ignoring him and pushed herself straight from the trunk. The look on her face was of sheer terror, and she reached her arm out, pointing at something we couldn't see beyond the trees in front of her. Oh God! Oh God! Help me! Please don't let it take me. Please, she half turned and staggered forward a few steps, almost like she finally saw us and was reaching out for help, and then... nothing. She was gone. Just vanished right before our fucking eyes. And I swear that when she disappeared I heard a sound like a door slamming. Boom. But why would there be a door in the middle of woods? We stood frozen, debating if we should go over and see if she had fallen or what, when we heard it. A low, guttural moan from the direction the girl had vanished, and then a sharp sound, unnatural to the forest around us. I swear you could feel the fear thick on the air as we looked around, trying to see what had made that noise. And then, I saw it, peeking out at us from behind the exact place the girl had vanished, a small, humanoid face with beady black eyes and a too small mouth turned down in a contemplative frown. It ducked back behind the tree. Beside me, one of my friends gasped and turned away swiftly, ready to run. Let's go, let's go, let's go, my other buddy urged, tugging on the straps of my backpack. We turned and booked it down the mountain, slipping and sliding in the mud but not stopping. Behind us was the sound of pursuit. Someone was definitely running, crashing through the trees behind us, but not close enough to catch us. It was like they were playing a game. We didn't stop until we made it to the trail marker and map we passed at the beginning of the hike. The forest was quiet again, and the sun was back low, like that rundown took us twice as long as usual. Like we lost time. We staggered out of the tree line, and the first thing I saw was the bright orange plastic siding of a dirt bike. Mud streaked the sides of it, and a black helmet was on the seat. Hey! What the hell are you doing, man? The anger in my buddy's voice startled me, and I shifted my glance over to the only other vehicle there, ours. A guy, wearing black cargo pants and a faded Dio shirt, was crouched by the side of it, looked like he was fiddling with the back left tire. My friend's Jack was next to the guy, and leaning on the rear bumper was another tire. You had a flat, changed it for you. Thought you might be in a hurry. Job already done. He stood, threw the jack and the busted tire back into my friend's trunk, and closed it. He looked over at us, sweaty and panicked, and washed, nodded once, and said something I'll never forget. You saw it. I knew he wasn't asking a question, but I answered anyway. Why yeah, I said breathlessly. Shit, he said, looking up and off into the distance behind us, at the trees. And the door? For a moment there was silence, and then I heard my own voice bubbling out of me, unstoppable. I heard it close. The guy opened his mouth to reply, but my friend cut him off, clearly at his wit's end. What the fuck is even going on? And how did you get into my car? The guy opened his palms in a conciliatory gesture and said, Look, I can explain, but a series of loud, rapid booms echoed down the mountainsides and towards us, drowning him out. At first I thought they might be bombs, until I realized that what it really sounded like was someone banging on a door, trying to get out, or in. The guy stood, mouth half opened, head cocked to the side, listening. And then a voice on the wind, a strange voice, like several people speaking at the same time. Don't talk to strangers. Oh, fuck me, he finally exclaimed before suddenly running over to the dirt bike, slamming on the helmet, and ripping out it fast as he could go towards the direction we had come from. What's happening? Your guess is as good as mine. Can we fucking go, though? Like, seriously? We piled into the car and made the winding way back down to Boulder in silence. And, like I said, I haven't really talked with my buddies since. Don't really know what to say. They don't seem too keen on talking about it either. There's been nothing on the news about the car or a missing girl or anything weird or spooky happening up in Netherlands. And how do you casually bring up a fucking experience like that to anyone? Even good friends? I know one person who might believe me though, my sister. She has this story, this crazy story about this time she went camping when I told her not to go. Anyway, she insists this random guy in a black suit saved her life. I didn't believe her at all before, and now I do. Now I believe. And I mean, he wasn't wearing a suit, but who knows, maybe the guy we saw, maybe it was the same guy. This is how I remember it starting. I was 11 and Dad had just taken me to the stable again to ride. At the time, we lived up in New England, near a wooded area that ran along the Canadian border. The stable was even farther north, still in America, but desolate enough that the road to get there was long, winding, unlit, a motorcyclist stream, unsure. Never did see one, though, only horses and the odd car, making the journey up or up further still. The stable itself was old, but the people were Dad's friends and they let me ride their horse, Sugar, for free every day. Said it was good for her. I loved Sugar. She was a sweet, 17-hand high white mare. And she was old, making her slow to startle, meaning I was safe, or at least safer than I would have been with any other horse there. Dad would often leave me alone, letting me explore the area from her back. He wouldn't go far though, and would sit chatting with the owners at a picnic table back at the barn. I'd always stay by the tree line, saying it was so Dad could see me when it was really so I could see him. But that day I was feeling more adventurous and hoped he wouldn't mind much of Sugar, and I wandered off for a while. Sugar's ears pricked forward. This was new to her. I think in a way she knew I was young, that she had to protect me, and it seemed like she was trying to resist my desire to explore. But, weaving through the trees, unable to see the stable, was exhilarating, and I urged her forward, towards the stream I could hear trickling nearby. Above us, the birds sang and the wind whistled. It continued that way for a good few minutes, until I was deep in the thick of the trees, and then, suddenly, like someone had muted all the background noise, nothing. I heard nothing, no birds, no stream, no wind. Sugar snorted and stopped, looking around. I felt it too, the fear, and though I didn't understand it at the time, I felt like I was being watched. It felt threatening, and I was scared. I pulled on the reins, trying to turn Sugar back towards the stable, but she wouldn't budge and snorted again, stamping down, nervous. I looked between her erect ears at the place she was staring at. All I saw were trees, but then, peering out from behind one of the thicker trunks, I saw it. The creature. I'm no artist, so I'll try describing it the best I can. It was ghostly white and long, at least, it looked long. And I say long because it was crouched near the tree and its legs and arms were bent backwards, like an animal. I'm sure if it stood up, it would be tall, maybe 8 feet. But it didn't have feet. Instead, its legs ended in weird stubs covered with many short feelers that undulated slowly at different speeds. Its hands were also bent backwards, and rather than fingers it had long, creeping tendrils that wrapped up and around its arms like vines. It squatted on its wrists, gorilla-like, and watched me from a face that was vaguely humanoid, but smaller, like it suffered from microcephaly or something. It was bald, had beady black eyes, 2 holes for a nose, and a minuscule mouth that was pointed slightly downwards like it was frowning with the effort of concentration. It made no move and just sat there, still as a statue, watching us. Finally, Sugar turned around and bolted back towards the stable. Behind me I heard a weird clicking noise, but nothing else, no sounds of chase. Every day after that, I would see it peeking out at me from behind the trees, like it was observing what I was doing. I wondered if anyone else saw it. The horses certainly did and made sure to stay away from areas it had been. I never told anyone, though, not even Dad. I was afraid even he would look at me with worry and start talking to me in a hushed voice like I was crazy or something. So, we kept going to the stable until, 2 years later, he asked me if I wanted to start working there during the summer. Of course, I agreed, and soon he was dropping me off from dawn till dusk, and I would spend my day hauling hay, cleaning stalls, and riding Sugar around the grounds, checking up on the fences and such. I figured the creature had never harmed me, only observed, so I wasn't going to let it stop me or scare me away. Every few days, I would ride Sugar through the woods to a well-fenced pasture. Dad told me not to, but I did anyway. He didn't need to know. It was about 20 minutes from the stable, along a thin dirt path. It was nice enough during the daytime, but at night, it was lit only by the light of the moon and stars, and when the moon was new, it was dead black and dangerous. I tried to only go during the day, when I could see, but sometimes I didn't make it in time, and we ended up winding our way through trees as the sun set, and I had to explain to Dad why I was so out there. This particular time I had been reading in the pasture for a while, and the sun was starting to fall behind the trees, casting warm, eerie shadows. Beside me, unsaddled, Sugar grazed on the tall grasses and flowers that grew there. I was just getting ready to head back when I saw it, leering out at me from under the shadows, the creature. It was close this time, closer than it had ever come before, and, as I watched, it stood up and slowly made its way over the fence surrounding us. Sugar stopped, perking up, looking at it from one of her long-lashed eyes, and whinnied as the thing continued walking towards us, making for the metal gate I had lazily closed by hanging the chain loosely over it. I quickly mounted Sugar bareback before she bolted and watched as the creature reached forward, took hold of the chain with one of the tendrils attached to its arm, and began pulling it in jerky motions until it fell out, clanking loudly against the metal poles of the gate. The creature took a few shaky steps forward before falling on all fours and charging at us with a jerky, unpredictable motion. I felt my throat seize up, unable to yell out. Sugar whinnied and reared slightly, before leaping forward and over the fence like she was goddamn Epona or something. She charged through the trees expertly, dodging them, hopping their roots. Every so often I ducked low under a branch. I could hear it crashing behind us, trying to keep up. I glanced back and saw it right behind us, reaching forward. Its face was expressionless, but I could tell that it was looking right at me. One of the tendrils on its arm touched Sugar's flank and she screamed, bolting forward even faster. The creature suddenly stopped, falling back behind the trees. We crashed into the clearing the stable was in, and I immediately saw the headlights from Dad's car parked next to the house. Sugar galloped towards them and slid to a stop, scaring the crap out of Dad and the man who owned the place. I told them there was something in the woods, something chasing us, and their faces fell. They each grabbed a shotgun and checked the perimeter while the owner's wife and I looked after Sugar, trying to calm her. There was blackish blood running down her side from the place the creature had touched her. I knew what had hurt her, what had happened, but told Dad and everyone else that it had to be from a branch or something. I'm not so sure they believed me though. The wound was strangely shaped with dozens and dozens of tiny circular puncture marks similar to those a lamprey might make. We treated the wound and put Sugar in a clean, safe stable, locking the doors behind us. She looked okay. We thought she was okay. She died not long after. They said she died peacefully in her sleep, but sometimes I wonder. Dad never let me ride a TH stable again, but it didn't matter. It didn't stop, and I still saw the creature almost every week after that. It always seemed to creep up from the edge of the forest in weird jerky movements, like it was hiding, like it didn't want me to see it. Each night I saw it, it had crept a little bit closer from the trees, closer to my window. It always looked as if it was staring directly at me. Always. It went from being a major threat to a minor annoyance, and I started ignoring it, pretending it didn't exist. 5 years later, I moved all the way across the country to the Pacific Northwest for school. It was a nice place, sure, but expensive, and I missed the horses. The city was big, but not big enough for me to hide from the trees. But for the first few months I was there, I saw nothing. And so, slowly, meek, another thought crept out. It was stupid, but it stayed, lingering in my mind, unspoken. Maybe that thing wouldn't be able to follow me out here. Maybe I had finally escaped its torment. It started when I moved out of the dorms and into my own apartment. It started at night. I was alone. I began hearing this soft clicking noise. It almost sounded like someone tapping the glass on my window or my coffee table with their nail. I usually ignored it, thinking it was just some weird quirk of the place finally making an appearance now that the weather had changed and the furnace was on. And then, one night in the middle of summer, I heard it, louder, insistent, someone tapping on the door that led to my balcony. I stood up, annoyed, before growing afraid. What if it was some creep, or worse? I made my way over, not even realizing I was tiptoeing, opened the curtain, and there it was, right there, gazing back at me with its beady black eyes. I covered my mouth, trying to squeeze back a scream, but it didn't work, and the sound of it echoed long and loud around my room. The creature turned its head. It had never heard me scream before, and the tiny slit that was its mouth quivered for a moment as if it were about to smile. I took a few steps back, searching for something to throw at the glass, to scare it away when I heard it. A knock, loud, demanding, at my front door. "Hey, you okay in there?" It was probably one of my neighbors drawn over by my scream. The creature looked over to my door, then back at me. Another knock sounded out, and the creature turned and leapt to the side of my balcony. I ran over, unlocked the balcony door, and glanced out. The creature was ridiculously tall, but as it walked away, I saw that its legs were slowly descending like rubber, like it had no bones. And I realized that it had somehow extended its limbs. That's how it reached my balcony. And maybe that was how it had been following me everywhere. Distance wasn't a problem when every step covered miles. Another knock sounded out, jarring me from my speculations, and I walked over to the front door and yelled through it, telling my neighbor that I was just watching a scary movie, that there was nothing wrong, that I was sorry I woke him. "No problem," he said. "If you need anything, don't hesitate." That month, not even a week after that incident, I flew back home. Dad was dying. I took the last flight out that day, hoping to get there before he was gone for good. I didn't. Arrived at the hospital right as he was taking his last breath. I sat, distraught, in the lobby, too afraid to look at him, in shock, until an old lady and man offered to take me somewhere. I looked up and recognized them, the owners of the stable. Not knowing what else to do, I nodded, and we left. We ended up in one of those late-night breakfast places, and I ordered some pancakes and black coffee, but ended up only drinking the coffee. After a few moments of silence, I finally spoke up, but not about Dad. It was too soon and I wasn't thinking right. Instead, I asked a question that had been on my mind for years. "Do you know about the creature on your property?" "The what?" The man hissed while beside him his wife pressed her lips together and set down her fork. I met his gaze, unsure if he thought I was crazy or if he saw them too, but tired of keeping it secret, I pressed on. Way back when I was still riding at your stable, there was this thing, long and white and humanoid. It started following me. That night, years ago, when Sugar was hurt, that creature, it must have wounded her. He looked at me, the concern growing on his features. Finally, he said, "You're not still seeing it, are you?" I met his gaze, wondering what to say, and ended up with, No, I'm not. I just wanted to know I wasn't crazy or something, you know? He didn't reply immediately, but sat looking at me, like he was sizing me up. Your dad said, before he died, he looked away, picking up his coffee nervously. What? He looked back at me. He said he wanted you to know that you're not the only one who's seen. Well, he cleared his throat and paused for a beat, then said, "You must be tired." And I knew he was done talking. And I was tired, so I didn't press him. Never did speak to them or see them again. Wondered what happened to them, where they are now. That night, unable to stay at my empty childhood home, I stayed at a hotel, but I couldn't sleep. Now wait. So, I got in my rental, equipped with a lantern and a bat, and made my way to the stable, not knowing why, only knowing that I had to. The stable was derelict, abandoned now, and I knew I shouldn't be there. It was stupid, I know. I parked next to the old house the owners had left years ago and hopped out with the light and the bat, ready. At first, I was only going to stay around the stable, see what I could see, but my curiosity got the best of me and I began creeping my way through the darkened woods towards the pasture. Every noise, the wind, the trees, my own breathing, put me on edge, but I made it there without incident. The pasture was old now and the fence was broken. I found myself finally tearing up at the memories I had in this place, memories of Sugar, of Dad. I turned, my heart racing. I heard the clicking noise again, and again, and again. It sounded almost like applause or maybe even laughter. And as I turned around in a large arc, shining the light through the trees, I saw them, hundreds of them, staring out at me through the gaps between the trees' faces. White, small, bald, horrific. Some were smiling slightly, others were frowning. Some were the same size as the creature I knew, others were smaller, and the rest were enormous, and even in their crouched positions, their heads almost touched the tops of the trees. They were all watching me, observing me. I felt myself starting to hyperventilate and knew I had to get out of there. So, I ran and ran, hearing them crunching along behind me, beside me, keeping up. How I made it to my car without being harmed, I don't know, but as I pulled out, my hand touched the pack of emergency matches I kept in the center console, and for one wild moment I thought of burning them all at the forest they lived in. Then I thought better of it and sped away. As I turned onto the main road, my headlights hit the tree line and I saw their beady black eyes glinting from the shadows between the trees. After that, I moved to Colorado, to Golden to be exact. Denver and Boulder were way too expensive, and while I would have settled in Greeley, I didn't really want to smell like cow shit all the time. Horse shit was enough for me. Golden wasn't necessarily cheap, but it was worth it. I had just bought my own horses and wanted a place near the outer edges of the city, where the houses run few and far between, where there's space enough to ride. I hadn't seen the creature for a whole year, so I thought I had finally escaped it. Maybe it needed to be by large bodies of water to survive, or maybe it had given up, or maybe, hopefully, it had died, got run over, twice, or shot by shotgun shells, or burned by fire. A few weeks ago, it started again, the weird clicking noise, and I sighed knowing what would come soon after. On nights where the moon was full, I would see the shadow of it through the blinds, just standing there, tapping tapping on my window. It went on like this for days, and I was quickly losing sleep and my sanity. Yesterday, after yet another sleepless night, I decided to make the drive up to Boulder. I just needed to get away. I went to a local pub, met some cool, helpful Boulderites, walked around on Pearl Street for a bit, and, as the sun started to fall over the Flatirons, I said my goodbyes to the place and the people and made my way back to Golden. The drive from Boulder to Golden is decently long, but it's beautiful, with the Flatirons framing one side and the plains spread out open on the other. For the first time in a long time, I was at peace. Maybe, just maybe, this would all end soon, and I'd be free to live my life as I saw fit rather than in hiding or fear. All these years, and I still didn't know what that creature wanted, why it was following me, how it could follow me. And as the sun slipped behind all those rows of Rockies, I sighed, thinking about finally losing it for good. Then I noticed something shadowed and long and fast sprinting next to my car. I took a deep breath and looked over. And there it was, running alongside my car like it was nothing. I was going almost 70 at this point, but it was somehow able to keep stride. It tapped on the window with one of its fine light tendrils like it was taunting me, then opened its tiny mouth, revealing a gaping hole with a triple split tongue. It didn't have any teeth. And out of its mouth poured some weird black goo. It smeared across the driver's side window, looking almost red in the moonlight. And then, in a wretched, foul voice, it spoke. It spoke like it was mocking me, my brief happiness. I have never ever heard it speak before, and even through the closed window, even at that speed, I heard it loud and clear. It was horrific. Ha! Found you, found you, found you. It suddenly jerked to a halt, and I sped away, watching it grow smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror until it blended back into the shadows. I ain't scared of nothing. That's why I yelled to my brother as I slammed the door to my car shut. Things have, changed since then. I've changed. I remember his smirk, how he held on my jacket, the way he spouted off an endless list of things I should be scared of, skinwalkers and witches and werewolves, oh my. He presented each one as reason after reason of why this idea was stupid, saying I still had time to flake out, save face. I remember rolling my eyes, snatching my jacket from his grasp, sliding into my car and yelling that I'm not scared before speeding away towards the darkening outline of the mountains. They stood out stark against the setting sun like teeth. Boy, how I wish I listened. I was wrong. He was right. I'm fucking scared. Let me back up a bit. It all started about 2 days ago. I was out of my mind depressed, could barely get out of bed, thought about chucking myself in front of cars, over bridges, off buildings, just dying. I thought about dying all the time. And enough was enough. One of the few friends I had suggested that I try solo camping said it might clear my mind, that the wilderness, the silence, the solitude would do me good. He gave me a list of spots, some more isolated than the others. I decided on the most isolated one, which was about a 3-hour hike from the last campsite far out in the Rocky Mountain National Forest. I remember his face, the surprise, the acceptance. You sure? His voice cracked. I nodded, saying nothing. Okay, I mean it's a pretty secluded place, especially for a first-time camper. He shrugged. But then again, it's a beautiful spot. It'll definitely give you some perspective. And the night sky out there is insane. I thanked him and turned to leave, but he spoke up again. Hey, don't let the forest spook you, okay? A word of advice from a veteran. Don't go out at night no matter what you hear. you might get totally fucked by a bear or lion. The drive up the mountains was strangely soothing. The gently curving roads that worked their way through the trees and up the rocks were exciting to navigate, and soon my mind was eased into a peaceful contemplation. I had decided to forego electronics this trip, even going as far as securing my phone in my glove box. I wanted to be completely free of all that shit, able to focus on the now rather than ruminate about the past or fear the future. I would be gone for 5 days and 4 nights, enough time for me to, hopefully, recuperate and reassess my life and what I was doing with it. I soon descended into Estes Park and drove through the picturesque town towards RMP, willing myself not to stay at the Stanley instead. I found the entrance to the park with ease and continued to the closest lot to my campsite. Night was now falling and I silently cursed myself for leaving so late. I sat in my car for a good 30 minutes before deciding that it would be too risky hiking 3 hours in near pitch black. There were 4 other tents set up in the lot I was at with room for 1 more, and soon I had my own tent set up. That night passed comfortably. I was surrounded by chatting, laughing people and unruly, but happy children who ran round and round screaming. A few of them offered me roasted hot dogs and s'mores and beers, and I filled my belly, smiling. I was rolled up in my sleeping bag before the last light from the dying embers faded away. The second night didn't go so smoothly. I woke up late, well rested, but still groggy, and took my time repacking my tent. I hesitated at first, wondering if I should just stay there, but at 3 p.m. another family showed up with proof they had reserved the site. So, I gathered my things and set off, and immediately got lost. Navigating by map and compass for the first time and alone is a lot harder than it sounds. And the trees. The trees can be misleading, can turn you around, make you think you're on the right path when really you're miles from where you're supposed to be. Instead of taking me 3 hours to get to the site, it took me nearly twice that time, and I was swiftly losing what little light was left in the day. Finally I found the site, but before I breathed a sigh of relief, I haphazardly set up my tent, building a small fire in front. It was dark now and I was jumpy. Every sound I heard was seemingly magnified, every shadow cast by the dim light of the fire, a menace. Spooked, I crawled into the tent and curled up in my bag, trying to will myself into sleep. After a while, I was dozing, about to drift off, when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a foot crunching outside. My eyes shot open and I reached for my flashlight, but didn't turn it on. I waited. I heard the sound again. Someone or something was definitely walking around my tent. It sounded like whatever they was trying to be quiet, stealthy. That went on for hours in inconsistent bursts until I finally decided it was an animal, scavenging for the scraps or inspecting my tent. By dawn I was dozing again and the noise had finally stopped. I told myself I would sleep for an hour or 2, giving myself time to rest up. I woke up disoriented, exhausted, and started to panic before remembering I was out camping and that I needed to start hiking back. Now. But when I exited the tent, I saw that the sun was already setting. To say I was upset would be an understatement. I hesitated for a moment, trying to decide what to do. I wanted to go home. I wanted to leave, see how far I could get up there. But deep down I knew I'd instantly get lost and probably end up in a worse situation. So, I began collecting as much wood as I could to build a big-ass fire and prepared to hunker down for the night. The light from the sun seemed to disappear unfathomably fast. The third night was, pretty problematic. I sat awake in my tent for hours after the sun went down, waiting. I'd left the fire going for as long as the wood lasted. I know this isn't kosher for camping, but I was improvising and I was absolutely terrified. The darkness around me seemed to crush the light from the fire, making it seem small, pathetic, a tiny candle in a sea of shadows. For hours I sat there, listening, afraid. Finally, I realized I was just being ridiculous, that what I had heard the night before was nothing to fear, that my subconscious, my monkey mind, was just playing tricks on me, keeping me alert for no reason. So I bundled myself up and laid down. And I heard it. Softly at first. A footstep. Then 2. 3. Growing louder, bolder. I sat up and felt my eyes increase to the size of saucers and my breath quickened. What was that? I had to know. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't. I was operating purely off of fear. I heard the noise. It sounded like something running and running around and around my tent. Suddenly, the side of my tent pushed in as if someone was slapping it from the outside. "Hey!" I yelled, scared out of my wits. "Hey! I'm awake. I'm in here." I tried to stand, tripping myself up in my sleeping bag in the process, and slammed into the front of the tent. Scrambling up, I swiftly unzipped the flap and ran outside with a red-tinted flashlight. I saw a shape scurry away and followed. And there, standing at the edge of the firelight, barely visible, was the silhouette of a person. They were standing with their back towards me. Their arms were hanging in strange positions by their sides, their head pointed straight away from me. I took a step towards them and a branch cracked underneath me. The sound seemed to startle the person and they turned their head ever so slightly. "Hey," I said again, "what the fuck, man?" And it boiled up, a sound that crescendoed into a scream. It was laughter, and it echoed around me, rattling around in my skull. I ran, leaping into my tent, zipping it up behind me, curling into my sleeping bag, crying. And the world around me exploded, or rather imploded. The walls of the tent shook, like hundreds of hands were slapping it, poking it, punching it. Outside, what sounded like dozens of people running around shattered the silence. I don't know how or why I fell asleep. I think I fainted. Either way, I woke up the next day to a reddish glow encompassing my surroundings. I sat up and ran outside, looking around for proof of what I had heard. But there was nothing, no footprints, handprints, or any disturbance at all. "Fuck this," I muttered to myself, throwing my things chaotically into my bag. I would leave today, in the dark. I couldn't stay another night here. I was just starting to unpull the tent when I heard it, a sound in the distance, perhaps carried to me by the wind which was picking up around me. "Help me. Help me. Please. Oh God, help me." I reacted more out of instinct than logic and began running towards the sound before realizing that I, in no way, was in a place to help whoever was screaming. Still, I tried to locate the source of the sound, following the voice for about 30 minutes. "Where are you?" I yelled, looking around me through the maze of trees. "I'm here. Where are you?" Quickly the screams descended into a deep, unsettling laughter. Scared out of my mind, I turned and ran back the way I came. By some miracle, I made it back to my site, grabbed my pack, and uprooted the poles of the tent, thinking that I would just roll it up and carry it back instead of taking the time to fold it neatly and shove it into its bag. Around me, the mountains loomed up like fangs, like I was about to be swallowed whole by a monstrous mouth. As I pulled each pole, the tent fell a little, but it was only on the third pole, about 6, that I realized it wasn't falling fully flat. Confused, I peered into the tent and reeled in horror, too afraid to even scream. There was someone sitting inside. But not just anyone. It was me. Sitting there, pallor and bone thin, a too-white grin plastered on my face. A single droplet of blood rolled down from each eye which, instead of having green irises, were totally, wholly black. I jumped back, tripping over my own feet. Laughter rose up around me, and as I scrambled up I saw my hand that was not my hand reach out from the tent, followed swiftly by the other, then the head. My face that was not my face looked up at me, still smiling, then laughed again. I screamed. I stood. I ran. And I ran. I didn't even know if I was running the right way. I couldn't even use the sun anymore for guidance since it had almost fully set. I ran without looking where I was going. I kept looking behind me to see if that thing, was following me. I could feel the trees scratching me up, pushing against me, like they were trying to hold me back, hold me still until that thing came for me. Suddenly a light flashed in my face and I ran into something solid, something black, something that wrapped around me. I instantly cowered, hiding my face in my hands. Shit. Oh, please God, no, 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 no. I heard my own voice, terrified, shaking. Hey, calm down. It's okay. You just scared me. Calm down. What's wrong? I looked up and into the worry gray eyes of a human face. The face of a middle-aged man, to be exact. He was holding me up. The flashlight he was using lay fallen at our feet, creating strange shadows behind us. The SUV slowed to a stop and a man popped the trunk and hopped out. He walked to the back and grabbed my pack as I jumped out. He handed it to me and I took it, and thanked him for everything. No problem, he said, all in a day's, or night's, work. His lips quivered as if he was about to smile. I turned to leave, but he spoke up again. Hey! I turned to face him again. If you ever want to talk about what you, saw, or, just talk, call me. He held out a card. I took it and looked down at it. It was matte black and only had a single number written on it. There was no area code. Then I began. I heard a door slam and looked up. The man was already back in his car. He waved at me, then sped up back the way we had come, back towards that thing. I shoved the card in my pocket, climbed into my car, and left, breathing a sigh of relief. I still haven't told anyone about what happened, even when they asked why I refused to go camping ever again. I just shrug and tell them it wasn't my thing, that I prefer a warm bed and the bustling sounds of a busy city. Every so often, though, I'll pull out the card, my fingers lingering over my phone, wondering if I should call. Wondering who the man really was and if he'd really be able to explain what happened to me. The sign above the chain read, "Welcome to Ascension in this world, none of it." The fence the chain was attached to was about 4 feet high and consisted of only a single bare metal wire that ran along the top of it. The letters were hand-painted on a few strips of wood strapped together to make the sign. The wood was chipping off at the corners and worn down from the wind. It had been here a while. At the top of the hill I could just make out what looked like the top of an old building. I ran into the wire on day 8 of my planned 3-week hike through the San Rafael Swellback country. It's not the first time something like this has happened. There are abandoned buildings, ranches, and towns scattered all over this area. I followed the fence for about a mile until I got here. It's kind of a big deal to discover, or rediscover, I guess, a new ghost town, and Ascension wasn't on my map, so I dropped a pin and took the chain off the fence. I get some good pictures, right up what I find, and maybe even have a night with an actual roof over my head. Things like this are why I don't follow the established trails anymore. At the top of the hill was what looked like an old storehouse of some sort, and looking down past it I could see the rest of the town. It was one lane with only a small number of buildings lining it. There were 19 houses, 2 of which were reduced to only their foundations, a store, the storehouse I was next to, and a church. Usually a town of this size would have a bar as well, but judging from the sign and the size of the church, I wasn't surprised there wasn't one. The store was still plenty sturdy and had a couple of tables to boot, so I set up my bedroll on the counter. I carry a small, collapsible solid fuel stove that works with wood just for occasions like this. I set it up outside and collected enough wood for dinner and breakfast. A hot meal eaten in a chair at a table is a rare comfort on hikes like this, and sitting there watching the sunset had me feeling like royalty. I slept like a baby. I woke up the next morning feeling like a new person. I got the water over a fire and started packing up, finishing as the water hit a boil. With a belly full of hot coffee and warm food, I stashed my pack behind the counter and set out to document the town as well as I could before I got on my way. The houses were plain and functional and exactly alike. Each had 3 rooms. The back room always held a single large bed, with a varying number of beds in the side room. A single rocking chair was in what I would call a living room, which was otherwise empty except for a wood stove on the outside wall for heat and a cooking surface. Above each stove hung a cast iron skillet. There were very few other possessions that I could find. The beds had blankets in states of decay, and there would be some tin plates and knives. That was about it. I expected I'd find Bibles, crucifixes, and other religious paraphernalia, but there was nothing. I guess they must have been the austere kind of wayward Christian community. I felt a little sorry for them, but even if it looked sad to me, this was someone's dream at one point. I just took my pictures and moved on. As I approached the church, I saw something dart into one of the houses. Just a quick flash of grayish-brown. There's coyotes out here, but it's not normal to see one during daylight. I moved a little closer, stepping carefully. There was a crash from the other side of the house as it knocked something over, then silence. I stood frozen for a moment, listening hard before I gave up, assuming the crashing sound was whatever I saw getting out of town by way of a back window. I took a moment to relax before turning back to the church. It was an absolutely massive building in relation to its setting. You could fit at least 2 of the local houses in its footprint, stack them too high, and still not have run into the steeple. A quick walk around it confirmed that there were no decorations or windows, and only one set of doors. They didn't even hang a cross. The steeple was the only thing that gave it away as the church. The wood was worn and cracked, but otherwise still whole. It looked like it had been painted white at one point, but the only paint left was little flecks trapped in a few spots of deeply worn grain. The rest had taken on a dark gray, almost black patina. It was an old building, for sure, but it looked to be in surprisingly good shape from the outside. The door opened with no resistance and barely even a sound. I stepped inside, pausing for a moment while my eyes adjusted. The only light came from the large open doors behind me. Looking around, there were pews near the door and a podium in the back. The pews were arranged in a semicircle around the center of the room with the preacher's podium on the far side, leaving a large open space in the middle. Everything was in surprisingly good shape. The pews were dark and worn. The wood had taken on the same almost black patina as the walls of the church, but with polished spots along the length of them where the churchgoers sat. I got a couple nice pictures of the sun's rays beaming in through the door behind the pews. It was a strange arrangement, having this much empty space in the center. Moving closer, I could see that the black and wood floor was laid with each strip of flooring coming to an end in order to form a circle and a new piece continuing to the wall. It didn't seem to have any purpose. The floorboards were just laid out in a way that traced out a circle. As far as I could tell, this was the only bit of pure decoration in the entire town. I got down on my knees at the edge of the circle to try to get a picture of how it was made. The ends of the strips of wood from inside the circle butted against the ends outside the circle almost perfectly, without even enough space to collect dust. There were no nails, but it was fastened tightly. I held my phone out, moving it around to try to get the best angle to show how the floorboards came together, and a shadow passed over the door. I froze, looking up at the still open door, waiting to see if something was going to join me in the church. The edge of a grayish-brown form brushed against the doorway, and I quietly scurried behind the podium for a little cover. I squatted down, making myself as small as possible behind the dark wood of the podium, only allowing one eye to peek out from safety. My muscles filled with energy and my nerves set a hair trigger, ready to run. Something moved under the church. The floorboards in the middle of the circle buckled up slightly, and the whole building shifted slightly under its force. I bolted. I ran fast and hard out of the church and into the store, where I rolled behind a window. Peeking out over the sill, I saw a grayish-brown shape crawl out from under the church and stand up. They looked to be about 5.5 feet tall, wearing shoddy pants, a hooded cloak, and no shoes. The fabric of their clothing had taken on the same patina of the wood, but also carried enough sand to make it difficult to pick them out from the landscape. The skin of their bare feet was caked with sand as well, as if they'd rolled in a patch of wet sand and just let it dry all over them. I stood up and waved, shouting, "Hey! Hey!" Sorry, I didn't know anyone lived here. They looked at me, then turned and ran, disappearing behind one of the old houses. Walking outside, I held my hands to my mouth as a makeshift megaphone and shouted out, "Sorry. I didn't know anyone lived here. Thanks for letting me stay. Sorry for the trouble." I turned and went back into the store to get my pack and leave. It had never occurred to me that anyone could have been living here. Everything was so old. It might have been kids from a neighboring ranch playing, but either way I didn't want to stick around. Coyotes are one thing, but people, well, they're just unpredictable. I reached behind the counter to grab my pack and came up with a fistful of air. It was gone. I ran behind the counter, checked everywhere, and came up with nothing. They must have taken it. A feeling started to percolate in my gut, a tightness. I closed my eyes tight, trying to breathe through it, to let it lighten up, and then turned and walked back out the door. I held my hands up to my mouth again, to help with projection. "Hey y'all! I need my pack. I got no problems leaving here, and I can pay you for any troubles I caused. Honestly, I didn't know anyone was here. If you just give me my pack, I'll be on my way." I stood there for a long minute waiting for a response. Nothing. Shit. My shoulders slumped. I walked aside of the church where I had seen the person crawl out and found a small dugout tunnel that went under the church. A sizable rock sat next to it with a short trail in the dirt from where it had been pushed out of the way. I looked around, hesitating. I got down on my knees and peered into the hole. Light streamed in through the floorboards. My pack sat in a hollowed-out area beneath the center of the church. I could see my water bottles glinting in the light, hanging off my pack. I sat back on my heels for a minute. God damn it. I cursed to myself, standing up and brushing off the dirt. I walked around the church, checking for anyone else who might be nearby. At the front of the church, I paused to check inside before coming around to the tunnel again. I looked around, taking care to look for any patch of color that didn't quite match the sand, and then I did what I had to. I got down on my hands and knees and started crawling into the hideout under the church. It didn't take long to get to my pack. I grabbed it and spun around back where I came. My hand found the sunlight pouring through the opening to the dugout just in time to see the rock pushed over it. No, I said as I scurried up against the rock, pushing with all my might. If I really laid into it, I could occasionally nudge the rock just enough to see that someone was out there holding it in place with their foot. Hey, I'm in here. You can have the pack if you want. Just let me have the water and I'll leave you alone. I swear, I didn't even know anyone lived here. It was an accident. Many footsteps echoed through the small cavern as people poured into the church above. The Lord has brought us a blessing. A dry, gravelly voice spoke from above me as I passed beneath the center of the church. So many years of waiting since our betrayal at the hands of the unbeliever. My knees caught on a rock, tearing open a small wound. The sand and dirt mixed with the blood to form a clay poultice. I gritted my teeth and kept pushing, dragging more and more clay into my leg. Quickly, now. Gather around, and we will complete our journey. The voice declared, stepping into the center of the circle above me. Quickly, while our volunteer is available. I grabbed the water off my pack and attached it to my belt loops, then leaned into rock and pushed hard. My effort met by equal resistance. The rock wouldn't budge. The sun came in through a space where the rock didn't quite fit in the hole. I put my fingers out, trying to get a hole in the rock to pull it aside. A flash of pain shot up my arm as a rock came down on them. I recoiled, cradling my hand. Nothing broken, but more blood dripped off of me into the sand. The congregation above me began chanting in a language I didn't recognize. More people joined, each selecting their own singular pitch. It was almost beautiful, a raspy choir forming the perfect chord. Overtones reverberated through the walls of the church, sinking into the sand below. The ground vibrated a tone in return, sending a wave back up into the church. I felt it move through my body each time, the congregation calling and the ground responding. It started to lodge itself in my lungs, vibrating as if I were about to hum alone. The ground beneath the rock was loose and a bit of it fell away. I started digging quickly, hoping to undermine the rock and pull it out from under my captor's feet. The congregation changed keys and gained tempo. The congregation reached their peak, and the ground responded with a deep, vibrating tone. I braced myself between the floorboards and the ground below me, pushing clay into my wounded hand, as the entire landscape joined in resonance with the chanting above me. Everything was vibrating. The slats of the wood floor began to separate as dust and sand fell through them, and the circled floor began to twist in place. A bright darkness enveloped the space beneath the circle and the sand began to boil. The rock fell into my tunnel. I took my opportunity, grabbing the rock and scurrying out of the dugout. A wet splotch slapped the ground behind me as I passed my captor, who had stepped back and was facing the church with his arms wide, looking past me. I ran hard, pushing my legs far beyond what I thought they were capable of, only looking back once. The church was encased in black as the ground was chewing through my captor. I held my glance long enough to meet the gaze of a single grotesque blurring into existence, its undulating iris filled with pupils deeper than should have been possible. I ran hard, replacing the chain fence and once again completing the iron circle. I ended my hike early, coming home bruised and aching, but alive. There are mounds beneath my skin where the clay had worked itself in and never left, and I still have the rock they used to keep me down there. I was so focused on getting out I forgot to drop it. Every once in a while I can hear it humming on its shelf.